Thank you, Ellen, and thank you everybody for being here. It's very nice to see you all. I'm Nick Weir from the Open Food Network. I'm also involved in Stroudco Food Hub in Gloucestershire. I'm also a part-time grower on the Community Supported Agriculture project, again in Stroud in Gloucestershire, where I live. I am a northerner by birth. I'm born in Preston, lived all my childhood up north, so I'm very glad to be here at the Northern Real Farming Conference. I've got two colleagues with me today, two people who work with the Open Food Network, Abby Morden and Rachel Gambro, who will be introducing themselves in a moment. We'll be talking about short food supply chains and how we work with groups of producers to build resilient local food economies where the food is grown, reared, baked, bottled, brewed, close to where the people who are going to eat that food live, so that there is a much shorter connection between the producer and the eater. We're doing that for lots of reasons. We had a very clear indication when COVID hit that people need short food supply chains and that the current mainstream food system is not working. It's not doing what people need it to do. The Open Food Network, the turnover through the Open Food Network shop fronts across the UK went up by 850% in the first 7 weeks of lockdown because people suddenly realized they needed to buy local. Sure enough, after lockdown, it dropped off again. It then peaked again on the second lockdown, and it hasn't been consistent. I mean, it's still, the turnover through the Open Food Network is still 5 times bigger than it was pre-COVID. But there are a lot of people who will only use it when it's urgent. And I believe that long term it will get more and more urgent. I think this pandemic is just the first of several shocks that will mean that we need to rethink our food systems and provide more resilient routes to market for our producers. Many of the producers pre-lockdown had a single route to market. They were supplying either a supermarket contract or they maybe had a hospitality contract where all of their produce was going to cafes and restaurants. And suddenly the cafes and restaurants were closed and they had to very quickly rethink their supply chains. So what we're trying to do with the Open Food Network is to provide a richer and more varied network of routes to market for producers. So I'm very glad to have you all here. I can see some people have joined since Ellen did her introduction, so please do, if you've got questions, stick them in the chat. There will be a big chunk of time towards the middle and end of this session where we will invite your questions. You may want to unmute and speak to us, or if you want to put the questions in the chat, they'd be very welcome. I'm going to do a brief introduction to the Open Food Network before I hand over to my colleagues. The Open Food Network is a global community of farmers, growers, food producers of all types, and software geeks. And between us, we have this common passion that we want to rebuild the food system from the bottom up. The Open Food Network was set up in Australia initially about 9 years ago. We brought it to the UK 7 years ago. It's a not-for-profit cooperative that is focused, as I say, on rebuilding the food systems for the world. It's deployed country by country, so I'm talking purely about the Open Food Network UK tonight, but it is running in 20 different countries with another 15 countries in the process of setting up. We all use the same software, and food producers all over the world are contributing ideas for how that software needs to evolve. The software is updated every week. Every Tuesday, there's a new release of the software with new features and functions, and we're co-designing this thing together. When I say open source, it means that it is owned collectively by the people who use the software, which is very different from proprietary software, which is owned and controlled by an individual or by a company. Open source software can never be sold and can never be taken over. And we believe that if we're building new food systems, we need to build that food system with tools that are different than the tools which were used to build the current food system. And that means that ownership and control needs to rest with the people at the bottom of the system, the food producers and the food eaters. And that is fundamental to the sort of belief system behind the Open Food Network. The map you're seeing, you'll see lots of tractor symbols. These are producers, and you'll see the shop symbols, which are what we call hubs. Hubs take many different forms, and you're about to hear from Rachel and Abby about two of the hubs in the UK. The common thing is that they will be selling produce from more than one producer. So some of these tractor symbols will be farmers who have a shop front on the Open Food Network, and they're selling their own produce directly to local eaters and buyers from their farm using the Open Food Network. The shop symbols may be a farmer who's selling their own produce, but they will also be selling produce from other farmers. And the network, the software allows producers to sell multiple producers' produce through one shopfront. The shopfront that I help to run in Gloucestershire doesn't actually produce anything at all. We are a cooperative of 85 producers, and we use a church hall on a Friday morning to collect all that produce together. The produce is ordered online. The producers deliver to the church hall. We bag it and box it, and then send it out to pickup points and home delivery in the local town. So that's the map. There's lots of gaps, and we'd really like you guys on the call tonight to fill in these gaps or join in with these hubs that are already trading. Let me show you what a hub looks like. This is one in Preston. This is taking orders for next Tuesday. They're going to be closing in 21 hours. So they will close before the distribution day in order to give the farmers and growers time to pack and prepare the produce. The producer puts up a description of the produce. You can see against every product on every Open Food Network website, you can see the name of the farmer or the grower or the producer, and you can click and find out a bit more about them. The producer can choose to put up contact details. They're choosing to put up a phone number and a website and an email. There is an option to link to social media, but we want to try and build close connections between the people who are producing the food and the people who are eating it. And then you can see the price of every product. With most hubs will make a markup on the produce. This particular hub isn't doing this. This is a bad example. I should have chosen a different hub. Most hubs will make a markup, and which means that the producer will set the selling price, and then the hub will add a markup to cover their running costs, because the hub has infrastructure, and in our case a church hall for a couple of hours every week, but they need to employ people to bag up and box the produce, to run the website, and they need to cover these running costs. So the hubs will make a markup on the price, and that is visible to the shopper. There's a lot of information on the back end. I'm not going to talk much about that, but there's a lot of detail behind the scenes. So the screen we just looked at was the front end that appears to the shoppers. The back end gives the administrator of the hub a lot of options in terms of managing products, managing orders, producing reports, managing customers. We have a concept of an order cycle. An order cycle is the period during which the shopper or the buyer places an order for delivery or collection at a particular time, and this back end allows you to manage those order cycles. At the moment, quite a lot of our hubs have got 2 or 3 order cycles running. They might have a weekly order cycle for regular shopping, and possibly a Christmas order cycle where people can start to place orders for turkeys and Christmas puddings and so on, and they can place the order now for collection or delivery in December. I think I'm going to pause there. I'm really happy to come back to this and take more questions later. But I'm wondering if I could at this point hand over. I'm going to ask maybe Abby to go first, and then Rachel, if that's okay, and ask them to talk a bit about their particular food hub. As I say, food hubs vary hugely. There are no 2 food hubs across the UK that are the same. There's 150 of them, and they're all very different, very tailored to their local area. But I'd like to ask Abby to tell us a little bit about Glenkens. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the the Glen Kens Food Hub. So I'm based in southwest Scotland, in an area called Dumfries and Galloway. If you know Scotland at all, you might know where it is, but you might not know where it is because we're one of those places in Scotland where people never come to. Tucked away in the southwest, motorway doesn't go through Dumfries and Galloway, and we're fairly cut off from the rest of humanity on the whole. Dumfries and Galloway itself is about 100 miles from east to west, and about 80 miles from north to south. And then we've got the Glen Kens local stats. The Glen Kens is a sort of micro region within Dumfries and Galloway. Our population here is about 3,500. And that covers about 1,000 square miles, although there's a massive body of water called Loch Ken in the middle of that. There's 4 main village centres, which have pretty decent local shops and a hell of a lot of kind of outlying community sort of hamlets and micro communities and farms. Majority older population over the age of 65, and very strong farming community, mostly beef cattle and sheep farming, and mostly upland farms. In this part of the world, there's a bit of a kind of rural myth that you can't grow vegetables. However, I run a market garden, so happily bucking that trend. It's a very small market garden. I'm only on about half an acre here, and I rent a bit of space on my friend's small holding. And just as Nick was describing, really, we kind of joined OFN at the start of the pandemic. That was about the same time as I moved to Dumfries and Galloway. I had been working in Glasgow around community food before that. And my original plan, moving to Dumfries and Galloway and setting up the garden, was to supply cafes and restaurants directly. And obviously that coincided with the pandemic. That wasn't going to be possible. So the obvious solution was to sell direct to customers. I'm an open source sort of person. I run Linux as my operating system, and don't use Microsoft for anything. So fully on board, and I'm a member of a workers' cooperative as well. So I'm fully on board with all the kind of ethos of Open Food Network. So it was the obvious port of call for me as a food producer. So we only provide, we sell vegetables exclusively to our kind of very local communities within sort of 5 miles, and we promote that via our Facebook page and a newsletter. So that's Hidden Veg, which is separate from Glen Kens Food Hub, which I'm going to come on to right now. So the Food Hub was kind of conceived as a kind of solution to kind of accessing veg and other produce in a kind of COVID-safe environment. So there's been a long-running market in this area called Glen Kens Producers Market. They've been up and running for about 10 years. It had been closed, obviously, during the start of the pandemic, and everyone kind of sort of told me on the side, oh, it was a bit crap anyway. A bit of a kind of sort of old people's coffee morning with a few producers standing around looking quite glum. So I'd been contacted and said, would I like to come on board with my Hidden Veg? It's like, yeah, I'd like to do that. So I got talking to the committee, and we started looking at kind of ways that people could access veg, if the produce, if they wanted to just sort of not come and browse, not come into the hall. They didn't feel safe enough to come and sort of mix with a whole bunch of people. The cafe bit wasn't going to open anyway. So we sort of said, okay, well, let's try setting up a food hub. So I connected with some of the other producers and I talked to them about this concept and this idea. And I had to help quite a few of them. I'll come to challenges in a wee bit, but essentially one of the biggest challenges that I faced was people aren't very techie. But the idea was to get as many of the producers with their own producer profile as possible. So that meant they had to set up their own sort of shop front. They didn't have to open as a shop. It could just be a producer profile, which they then linked to the Glen Kens Food Hub, and then I would manage everything from the kind of back office kind of end. So we started with 8 producers. So obviously myself selling vegetables, and another excellent person in the area who also sells vegetables, but she sort of majors on her pickles and preserves and vinegars and that kind of thing. We had the butcher, who was a sort of long-running market producer, and a smokehouse as well. Who else did we have? Jill's Buns. She just designed a patisserie, sort of croissant and ganache and that kind of thing. Really beautiful produce. And a few others as well that I've kind of forgotten. Another little bakery. So a few others that kind of came on board, but only really had their kind of producer profile that was linked to the hub, and they weren't really using it outside of that. Unlike myself, on a weekly basis. So the producer market's a monthly thing. So people were able to go online, place their orders, and then collect at the market, and obviously they could choose from a whole range of different producers. So the benefits to us as producers was that we built up this online profile, and had a sort of a real kind of good pool of regular producers who have really stuck with us. Regular customers, I mean, who have really stuck with us. People that order on a regular basis, who kind of look out for when the hub's open and get excited about it and tell their friends and that kind of thing. So that's been brilliant. Like I say, everyone, if they wanted to, they had the option to run their own producer profile as a shop front. Most have chosen not to do that for various different reasons, but they could if they wanted to. I think we've all seen increased sales. So obviously we're open, we're there at the market with our stalls anyway, so people can just come and shop, they can drop in, they don't have to pre-order. But the fact that we've got a pre-order system means that people kind of go online and they see all the produce there in front of them and they go click, click, clickety click. So I think that has actually translated into an increase in online sales, or sales across the board. And we've also built up this great sort of collective or cooperative producers. So we work really closely together. We bounce ideas off each other. We make sure we're not in competition. We're working collectively. The benefits to the customers, obviously, is they've got this easy access to all their food in one place with a wide variety of choice. And this area particularly, people have a really strong connection to their local community, and there's this real strong feeling of community wealth building and a resilient local rural economy, and folk around here really want to see that. So I think it gives them an opportunity to kind of feel involved in that, and that's just brilliant. Challenges, like I said, not all the producers are techies, so there were quite a few of those producer profiles that I had to set up on behalf of the producers. Our smokehouse guy, he hasn't got a mobile phone, let alone on the internet. So that was a kind of regular checking in with him. What have you actually got available? It took up quite a lot of admin time for myself. The other problem that we had was our customer base. As I said, the majority population around here is over the age of 65. And while a lot of those kind of people are internet savvy these days, there's also a fair chunk that aren't. So we do know for a fact that there's people that were not ordering using the pre-order system simply because they didn't understand how to use it. I would quite often be asked when I was in the local villages, or where is the shop? It's like the shop only exists on the internet. So what's the internet? So yeah, that's a bit of a barrier, and so I have tried to kind of promote the fact that you could phone and order stuff. So I can sit in front of the computer and sort of click things for people, but I'd like to find a more sensible solution to that, because it doesn't seem like a great use of my time. Because we were linking it to the producer market, we had to use the market producers that were already there, which was a little bit troublesome for myself personally, with a bit of a kind of sustainable agroecological regenerative farming kind of ethos to everything that I do. And the butcher certainly wasn't fulfilling that criteria. Neither is Smokehouse guy. He's lovely, but he gets all his stuff from Costco. But because it was linked to the market, we had to go with the traditional market producers. And I would personally rather have these checks and balances and go, well, are you actually a sustainable producer? Do you meet this good food, better food trader kind of criteria? The other barrier, I think, is that we've been sort of doing this click and collect only, so people had to come to the market to collect their produce. We haven't had the infrastructure to set up a delivery system. Now, very recently, there was a bit of a mess up at the market. The committee invited a third baker to come along rural community, small numbers, low footfall at the market. Our two main local bakers walked out, so they're not coming back. And I'm a solidarity sort of person, so I've walked with them. So, oh dear. So that meant that three of us, three local producers, have actually left the market. And what does that mean for the food hub? Well, we don't have to link the food hub to the market. It can entirely have a life of its own. And coincidentally, Propagate has just finished concluding this scoping study. So we don't just do food growing, we do lots of food education kind of work, and sort of I also coordinate the local food partnership in Dumfries and Galloway. So this piece of work was looking at, over the last few months, been looking at kind of the needs around local food and aspirations for local food in this community, in the Glen Ken specifically. And really that showed us very strongly that people want their food to be organic, and they want it to be sustainably produced, and they understand what that means as well. There's also this wide support for the food hub and for a delivery system, a real strong support for a community supported agriculture scheme to be set up locally, and also this kind of recognised need for food education and food networking as well. So this has all coincided at exactly the same time as the kind of some of the producers have walked out of the market. So we've got this opportunity to do something a little bit different with the hub and take it to another level. And so we were kind of looking at this anyway and scoping out, okay, we were talking to somebody in one of the local villages about using their big garage, very lovely clean garage, as a kind of packing and sorting hub. We've built up a kind of relationship with the community transport folk who have got an electric vehicle, who are up for doing the deliveries. So at the moment, so I should be looking at this stage by now. At the moment, we're just kind of looking for funding, basically, to try and set up some of that and really make it happen. We're also taking the opportunity to set up a sort of festive online of a sort of festive food hub as a bit of a one-off and a kind of suck it and see deliveries or collections. Not really sure exactly how it's going to work, but we're going to do it. And it gives us opportunity to, as I say, bring on better producers. So we're dropping some of the ones that were traditional at the market that weren't quite on board with the sustainable food principles. I feel a bit bad about that, but it does mean that we can then open the doors to an organic beef farmer about 25 miles away, an organic pork farmer about 25 miles away as well. To the organic bakery that's based about 13 miles away. So there are other producers out there who weren't at the market who we can now say, come on board. And the great thing is that most of them are already on OFN. So guess what? We can just link them directly to the hub without any faff, back office, click, 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 all done, nice and clean. So yeah, it's a brilliant outcome, actually, in a way. And it means that we can get these get this kind of Christmas order out to people with a really broad selection of really good local food that's been sustainably and organically produced. And just to add on to that, as a final sort of takeaway, we're also talking to somebody who owns a derelict walled garden that hasn't been touched since the 60s about taking that on for the CSA. We're talking to the schools about a partnership project around food education, and we're going to be creating more opportunities locally for people to get involved through things like seed swaps and produce shares and all sorts of other really exciting and lovely things. So yeah, that's our story. I'll stop the share and I guess hand over to Rachel.
Thank you, Abby. That was amazing. And it's so exciting to see that dynamism of a local community building its own food hub. And yeah, making decisions about what kind of producers do you want to sell, and if other people don't like it, they could set up their own food hub, and they could have, there could be multiple food hubs that were run on different principles. I just love that story. I've got a few comments, but yes, I'd really like to hear from Rachel first. And if anybody in the call has questions, please do put them in the chat, and we will have lots of time for questions and discussion later. But over to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Rachel Gambro and I'm based in Aberdeen. So I run the Mixing Bowl, which is a community food interest group, just a community group really. And as part of the many things that we do to try and bring people together to enjoy food, one of the things that popped out in 2015 was the idea of setting up a food festival to celebrate the food of Aberdeen City and Shire. And we were overwhelmed by the response of the local community, and it soon grew. And just before lockdown, we had our most successful of our festivals, with over 3,500 visitors, 70 food and drink food businesses. And it was a really exciting day that people are still talking about today. So we were very disappointed, obviously, when COVID put a stop to all that, particularly as we had grown out of our venue and we needed to move onto a new site. So it took us a little while to readjust, but it was July of last year that actually Nick was doing a talk with the Soil Association. And I heard about this and thought, oh, I'll dial in and see what this is all about. And it was just the answer that I had been looking for, because the festival had always been a huge amount of work for a very small team for a one-day amazing day. And we always said, what if I got run over by a bus? What if I was ill? There was always a what if. And we just needed to make it more sustainable. So when we heard about the hub, it felt like this could be a way forward. So we decided that we would, after a few conversations with Nick, decided that we would start a trial. We ran that trial about, October, November, coming into December of last year. And we had 15 producers. Again, like Abby was saying, mainly from our previous history with the festival, there were 15 that immediately said, yes, they definitely want to be part of it. So that was fantastic. And the trial went extremely well. There was clearly an interest. We don't have a farmers market in our neighbourhood. When I say we're in Aberdeen, we're actually on the west side of Aberdeen, and there are 4 small villages or hamlets, if you like, neighbourhoods in the area that we're dealing with. And the space that the communities that we're talking about are 4 square miles, basically. So it's quite a high density area, and there's no space for a farmer's market. So we felt that this could be a good way to move forward. With all the work with the festival, I had a fantastic, very keen band of volunteers who were really excited to get involved, and off we went. So that worked well, and we thought after Christmas, right, this is super, let's keep this going. And then of course we had the second lockdown, and the venue that we were kindly donated to work out of was actually a special needs school in our area, and they obviously had to close to the public and close to us, and so that stumped us for a little while. And then we were luckily able to use the marquee that had been put up behind a local pub, so that saved us, and now we're back into the school again. So I'm sort of the hub administrator or manager, if you like, and then I have a band of, I think it's 9 volunteers who we sort of work a rota. Nobody feels that they've got any a huge amount to do. They drop in for 2 or 3 hours, and then the next person takes over. So it's a very manageable way of moving it forward. But in preparation for this call, Nick had said, well, maybe mention the benefits of the hub. So I thought, okay, well, let me go back out to the producers and ask them what the benefits are. So this is a summary of what the producers were telling me. Nothing is a surprise here. They say it's a very easy system to use. They really appreciate the Open Food Network system. Very easy for them to first of all, ensure that their profile is set up. I actually, maybe I'm a bit of a control freak, but I like to set them up initially and then share management with it. So it enables both them and I to have access to the back end. So I set up the profile for them and then invite them to log in and to add their products. So they do that. I would say that any issues that I've ever had, OFN have always been right there to solve those issues, either Nick on a Thursday morning or you just email in, and there's a great support behind there. It's also constantly developing, and quite often we hear about the new developments that have popped up, and so it feels that it's really got energy and it's growing. The producers, like I say, feel that it's very easily managed. What I do is we run on a fortnightly basis, and on a Tuesday I'll send a WhatsApp to all my producers and say, okay, by the end of tomorrow, can you make sure you've adjusted all your stock levels? Then on the Thursday, the order cycle opens, and it stays open until Monday at lunchtime. And then Monday afternoon, I go in and there's just a button, off you go. And then purchase orders go out to each of the producers in a bulk quantity of what's required. And then they have until the following Thursday to be able to prepare and get it ready to deliver to us. It's a very flexible system, which means that they have complete control of their stock levels. And an example of this was the other day, one of my vegetable growers pinged me. I think it was actually, we had already opened, and she said, I've just found I've got one extra pumpkin. Can I just pop it on? I said, why not? Stick it on. And we were able to update the system while it was still live. And then it was bought within 2 or 3 minutes. And so that was like, oh, that worked. So that's ultimate flexibility. Also, another benefit that they love is the single point of delivery. So it allows for producers to focus on the growing or the rearing or the producing, whatever, the creating, whatever they're doing with their food. And it takes the stress and time away from the selling and the delivery, which is obviously in our remit. So we, as I said, run out of a school, so our overhead costs are minimal. When we arrive, it's empty. We then use the space, and when we leave, it's empty. So that is great, and that then allows us to offer a very fair price to our customers, and that obviously then allows the producers to reinvest their earnings back into their business. So one of the veg producers actually told me that it's really important for her, because if they're growing maybe some of the more expensive vegetables, for example, if the vegetable takes up a lot of space or it's slow growing or expensive seed, they can still get a return on it. And that's obviously then very important to us too. Another aspect of the same thing, we have a venison supplier, and he was saying that venison is often seen as a niche product, but he's able through this system to still make it affordable to everybody. And so those who may not have otherwise wanted to try it are now able to try it and hopefully enjoy. So yes, the Open Food Network gave me advice at the beginning to set a markup, which is obviously less than you would have for a retail store. And that is actually quite interesting, because it has enabled me to set up a markup on an individual basis. Obviously, we need to be sure that it's a very fair system across all of the producers. But there was one producer who was sort of just dipping the toe in, wasn't quite sure, didn't really know. And so we said, well, just for a short period at the beginning, how about you have a slightly, we set a slightly lower markup, which enables them to take a little bit more just to see how it works. And then we were going to review it. So again, it can be very flexible. So it also enables the teamwork between the producers. The hub offers a really wide range of products across all different food groups, and this enhances the individual sales of product, because customers who come to the shop front start at the top of the list and slowly scroll down to get to the bottom, and in doing so they've actually browsed through the whole list of products. And I believe that has encouraged good sales for some of the products that maybe wouldn't otherwise. And then, yeah, it offers networking experiences for them. So and support between producers. So we've got some producers who share delivery. They're along on the same route, and between them they take turns to drop off at the hub. I've actually got 3 vegetable growers, and we're just at the beginning of, we're just bringing on the 3rd one right now, and we're trying to work out how to make it a very fair share between the different vegetables, so there's not too much overlap and minimizing on the competition. And so they between them have decided that they would like to set up a WhatsApp group, and then they will talk between them as to who's got the most of which product on a fortnightly basis, and then they will load up the stock dependent on that. So that's real collaboration. So yes, it also helps producers who are at different sizes and stages, and helps them to raise the profile of the products that are grown in the area, because they're obviously we're a bigger name than just 1 or 2 of the producers. We've got quite a reputation, and them being part of our hub is helping them too. And then the last thing that was mentioned was that it's very important to them that they're selling to a local audience, and they can see that our customers are really appreciating the products that they're popping onto the hub. So it's working for everybody. So that was just a summary, really. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you for taking the time to get your producers to give us that feedback. That's really helpful to have that specific feedback. And one of the points I was picking up there is the thing about the flexible markup. And I heard Abby saying that some producers do take a lot of time because you have to phone them up every week and check their stock levels and so on. We have exactly the same with our food hub, and we're very clear with them that if you are able to do all the back end management of keeping your stock levels up to date and your prices and your product descriptions, then we will charge a lower markup than if we have to do that for you, because it does take time, and we need to find a way for somebody to be paid to do that work. So there's lots of questions coming in. I wonder what order we take them in. There was a question that Peter put up about, it came up when Abby was talking about taking phone orders from customers who don't have internet access. And his suggestion was that you rope in other customers. I don't know if you do that, Abby, or Rachel, do you get other people to take phone orders for people who don't have access?
We don't. Sorry, Abby, we don't have that much of a problem. We found that most of our customers are online and are able to do that.
We have found that neighbours have taken orders for neighbours, sort of thing. So rather than kind of phoning in, they're adding their neighbours' orders onto theirs. So that's been happening informally, and it's definitely something that we can encourage, and would like to kind of find ways of encouraging that as well. That's kind of support and solidarity amongst neighbours. I think this community is quite good at that kind of thing, helping each other out. But yeah, a way to kind of actively encourage it. It's a good idea, and we should do more of that.
Thanks, Abby. And yes, that was certainly our experience across the UK, or across the world actually, in terms of the community responses, particularly around the pandemic, and when trouble hits, people do look after each other in a really quite impressive way, and that was happening a lot. People taking orders for each other, people collecting and delivering orders to people who were self-isolating, and lots of very inspiring stories of communities being brought together around food systems. And there is a system within the Open Food Network for you to set up what we call phone buddies. So some hubs have a network of phone buddies who can create an account. So rather than people just putting an order in on behalf of a neighbor, it is possible to set up an account for somebody who doesn't have internet access, and for a volunteer or a paid person, for a buddy to take orders on behalf of somebody who doesn't have internet access. The next question was for you again, Abby, from Charlotte, about your scoping study, and wanted to hear more about how you conducted the study and how it fed into deciding what were the viable next steps.
Yes, so the study really came on the back of another piece of work locally called the Glen Ken's Community Action Plan, which earlier in 2020, pre-pandemic, had looked at multiple aspects of community life in this area. And one of the strands that came out of that was sitting in the economy section was around food. So we were kind of tasked really there's another organisation called Glen Ken's District Trust, and we were tasked to propagate with picking up on the kind of food actions and kind of delving a bit deeper into those, fleshing them out, and finding out more about what the local community wanted in respect of local food. So it was really kind of sort of building on that. And we spoke to about 150 local people via surveys. We had producer focus groups, we had community focus groups. We talked to shops and hospitality sector in the local area around their needs. Most of this was predictable, but we had to go through it for the community, so that it was definitely sort of community involved and community led. And yeah, the sort of these kind of core kind of themes that ran through everything were around kind of food education, people being involved in their food systems, cooperative structures. Nobody at any focus groups actually mentioned the word food sovereignty, but really that's what everybody was talking about, whether they knew it or not. So we've kind of framed it in that way to I kind of really introduce that concept as and that terminology to people locally, and to sort of say, okay, well, we've got an opportunity here to kind of really involve people in kind of co-creating a resilient food system, and that's called food sovereignty. So yeah, the scoping study really has informed how we're going to take things forwards, and what we'll build from here onwards, and how that happens in practice. Yeah, and I think the food hub has to be a really important part of that, quite central to that really, as a kind of, yeah, the kind of idea of a hub, both in a physical and metaphorical sense, is kind of quite appealing to a lot of people. So I'm happy to share a link to it. And you can download the whole report if you like.
Thanks, Abby. Yes, if you put a link up in the chat, that would be amazing. Thank you very much. There's quite a few questions. Maybe Rachel, maybe you would like to take the next one. It came up while you were talking, and it was again a question from Peter about, is there a minimum number of producers that you think is necessary to make a hub work, and a basic range that's necessary to make a hub work? And then there's a question for both of you, which you might not want to answer, which is about your markups and your turnover. I don't know if either of you are willing to share that. If not, I'm happy to talk about the food hub that I run. But maybe Rachel, you could take the one about the number of producers and the range, please.
Yeah, sure. Minimum number of producers. I mean, physically, I don't think that there is a minimum number, because you can have just a shop front for one producer. But then I suppose in order to make a hub exciting for the customers, you want to be offering a nice range. So it's interesting. So we at the moment are sticking to just product that is made within Aberdeen City and Shire. And our next step is, do we then branch out to other products that are not made within our area in order to make the hub more of a one-stop shop? So that's completely the opposite end of the spectrum. But going back to a minimum number of producers, if you were able to represent, yeah, maybe bread, meat, veg, cheese, something like that, then there's some interest there. But Nick, would you agree that there's not really a minimum number?
Yeah, completely, Rachel. I mean, there are some open food network shop fronts that are a single producer, which is not a hub at all. They're literally just selling their own products, and they are viable. I think they maybe get more viable the more producers there are, because then we get the thing that you were talking about where people are scrolling through other people's products in order to find the products they're looking for, and they will impulse buy when they see things they weren't expecting. But yes, I wouldn't say there is a minimum number. I'd agree with that. Yeah. And I wonder if either Abby or Rachel want to take the question about margins and turnover. And it's fine to say no.
No, I'm happy to. I'm open. So going on the Open Food Network advice, we have set our markup at 20%, and yeah, turnover, predicted turnover for our first year, because we're still very new, we're thinking it's going to be just over 20,000. But that's, I think, quite small compared to some other hubs.
I don't think I could tell you what the turnover is without going into the back office and pulling off the reports. It's not very bad. It's not something I've been monitoring particularly. In terms of markups, see, I have trouble with this in some ways, simply because, you know, as in addition to believing that our food should be ecologically produced and sustainably produced and from local producers, I do also think that it needs to be affordable and accessible. And so I really struggle with kind of putting too high a markup on things, and therefore making it unaffordable for people. So our markup really is just the enterprise fees that go to OFN for the contribution for running for sort of hosting it, I suppose. And we've been in the fortunate position of having some funding, a small amount of funding, to answer somebody else's question, I think, a small amount of funding from the Prince's Countryside Funds, and also because we live in an area that is full of wind turbines, we have a lot of money coming into the local community from wind farm money. So we've been able to sort of cover sort of 5 hours a week of admin time for those costs. People did say in the scoping study focus groups that they would be prepared to pay for delivery, so that is something that we will look at, because obviously if we're going to start doing a kind of having a packing shed and a sorting hub and delivery systems, that's going to cost quite a lot more. It's been fairly skeleton sort of until recently, so you know we do need to kind of look at how much it's going to cost going forward, and where it's going to come from, and run it as a viable business and not be dependent on its external sources of funding. However, as I say, we have got wind farm money, and we can tap into that, and because it fits with the Glen Ken's community action plan, and the district trust, and the district trust administer that wind farm money, we can easily tap into it. But yeah, it would be better if it was a viable business. But as I say, you know, it's important that produce good food is both is affordable and accessible, as well as being sustainably produced. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine, this kind of dichotomy between like producing good food and then charging loads of money for it. It's like, oh God. So yeah, I'm sure everyone struggles with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Abby. And yes, you mentioned the contribution to the Open Food Network. I did need to let people know that anybody who runs a shop front on the Open Food Network, who's actually selling produce online through the Open Food Network, we ask them to pay 2.9% of their online turnover to the Open Food Network if their turnover is more than £500 a month. If you're just experimenting and trying it out, then you get to use it on a donations basis. But once your turnover goes over £500 per month, we ask for 2.9%. That's including VAT. And there was a point you made about turnover. Yes, people were asking about turnover. The food hub that I'm involved with, we do make a 20% markup. Our turnover is between £1,000 and £1,500 per week through the food hub. Some of our producers are more complicated. Those who we have to phone up every week and check stock levels, we charge a higher markup, maybe 25%, 23, 24%. And some of our producers, we have to go and collect the produce from the farm, and we also we charge a 25% markup on their products. question from Ellen, which I don't know if Rachel or Abby want to take, about building the market and building a workable distribution. So how to sign up more customers and build the capacity and to scale up a food hub. Any tips from either Rachel or Abby on that one?
I would say that OFN again has been fantastic with this. That there have been quite a number of webinars that are focused on the marketing side, which are well worth your time, and that was something that really helped us. So covering social media marketing, but other aspects of marketing as well. We are still in a very much a growth phase, although we're being held back a little bit by our venue, and we're going to put a bigger emphasis on that in the new year, hopefully once we move to a slightly different location. But you're also talking about excuse me, distribution. Are you meaning sort of distributing the products to the customers? Because we run both a pickup and also a delivery system. But again, like I mentioned, we're in a very small, close-knit community area, and our volunteer team have very kindly stepped up, and we just split it so that there's just a small number of deliveries per person, and they go out by car and drop off. So that works for us.
And I guess in terms of a kind of promotion locally and marketing, yeah, I think similar to Rachel, as I've kind of said, this is also quite a kind of close-knit community, or despite being dispersed over a large geographical area, people know each other very well, as you can expect from rural villages. People like to know what's going on. So yeah, between our social media presence, which really has just been Facebook. I'm not personally an Instagram person. If somebody wants to set up an Instagram for the food hub, then go ahead. But I'm not running it. But the Facebook sort of promotion has been pretty good. There's some good local groups, so it's just tapping into those local groups and getting to know the key people who will disseminate that information. So one of our kind of strongest allies, for example, is Jane, who runs the hairdressers in one of the local villages, Dalry, and everyone knows hairdressers like to talk. So it's actually her garage that we're going to be using for the packing sheds. And I spoke to her on the phone the other day, and she was like, "How else can I help?" It's like brilliant. Just promoting it, Jane. That's what you need to. That's all we need to do. So yeah, finding those key people who will kind of want to sort of be your allies and your advocates, but have a kind of community respect, and are well known in the community already. That works really well around here. Yeah, and as far as distribution is concerned, I mean, as I said, so far it's just been the click and collect and very dependent on people coming and getting it. So we have been building up this sort of relationship with the community transport, and they have got an electric van, and they're very keen to help us. Obviously, they're going to need paid. The drivers need paid, and they need paid for the mileage. Still got to charge for things. So yeah, that'll be incorporated into funding application. But again, that's using a very well-known, well-respected local organisation rather than trying to invent something new, or buy new infrastructure. So yeah, it might come to that eventually, but kind of tapping into what's already there, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, literally.
Great, thank you, Abby. And the webinars that Rachel referred to are on the Open Food Network website. So the marketing support webinars, I put a link up in the chat to the resources page, and you can find all the recordings of the webinars there, and lots of tips and tricks for building a customer base around a food hub. The other thing to mention is that the Open Food Network has just employed 2 Kickstarter employees. You might have heard of the Kickstarter scheme. This is a government scheme for long-term unemployed people, and we've taken on 2 of those people within the Open Food Network with a specific focus on helping food hubs build their social media presence. So they're working with anybody who's using the Open Food Network to build their social media profile. So do let us know if you'd like that kind of support. And there's huge areas of social media that I know nothing about, let alone Instagram. The whole thing is a complete mystery to me, but these two amazing young people are doing wonders for Food Hub customer profiles. Then a question from Dusty about, is anyone paid for running food hubs, or is it all done on a voluntary basis? You have heard a lot about volunteers tonight, and most of the food hubs that I'm working with do have at least one paid person. They quite often have a lot of volunteers because there's such a good vibe around food hubs. People want to get involved. You know, we're just hearing Abby talking about her hairdresser friend who wants to help. People want to help food hubs. There's a really good energy about them. So they do attract quite a lot of volunteer support. And I believe that any kind of enterprise should not depend on volunteers. It's really, really important that the food hub, if it is using volunteers, that they're adding value that is not essential to the core running of the operation. Some food hubs start with funding, and the funding pays the food hub administrator, the food hub manager. But certainly most of the food hubs that I'm working with on a long-term basis will need to become financially self-sufficient, and they do that via the markup that we've been talking about. So they will add an enterprise fee, they'll add a percentage on top of the producer's price, and that will cover the people who are running the food hub on a paid basis. And any other questions coming in? Ellen, are there any questions that I've missed or anything that I should have picked up on? Oh yeah, Nabi's mentioned about the Kickstarter, working in a market garden. Yeah, so anything that we should have picked up on? Oh, Peter had some questions at the beginning. Ellen, before I go back to Peter's questions at the beginning, do you want me to, is there anything that you think we should have covered that we haven't?
No, I think you've picked them up as they've been coming in.
Okay, great. So Peter was talking about farmers markets, and I think I mean, Abby's presentation, you know, covered quite a lot of background there. There are various food hubs around the UK that either are based on a farmers market or they supplement a farmers market in some way. There's the one that I'm thinking of particularly is Helston Farmers Market. They were a monthly market and they wanted a more regular presence. They didn't feel that they could justify having a weekly in-person market, so they started off by having the monthly farmers market and then using the farmers market premises as a drop-off point for an online farmers market that happened on the weeks when the monthly market wasn't happening. And that has been very successful, and the market is now fortnightly, and they've now integrated it so that the online market runs on the online market is every week now, and some weeks it is a face-to-face market as well as an online market. The benefits they've found are that you can invite a lot more producers to be part of an online farmers market, because in order to actually populate a stall at a farmers market, you need to be quite a big producer. You need to be producing quite a lot of produce. You need to be able to sell quite a lot to justify the cost of the stall at a market. Whereas a lot of the producers we've been talking about tonight are quite small scale. They're producing really small quantities, you know, a few jars of jam or a few cakes and muffins or whatever. And they don't want to spend 3 or 4 hours standing at a farmer's market stall, and B, they don't have enough produce to justify that. Whereas online, it doesn't really matter if they're quite small. They will. There's no minimum order volumes through the Open Food Network. So you can have a much broader range of producers, including quite small scale producers. The producers don't have to actually give up much of their time to actually stand at the market. They literally will just drop the produce off and it will then be boxed and sorted. If it is linked to a face-to-face farmers market, you've got the benefit of a lot of the producers going back from the market with empty vans and trucks. If they want to, they could become a pickup point for the online farmers market. So all the produce comes into the market, it's bagged up and boxed up, ready to go out. And the producers can then take some of those boxes and bags back to their farm and provide a pickup point in their local village or wherever they've come from, which extends the geographical reach of the market. It means that people who wouldn't normally come into the market can actually get produce from the market more locally, reduces the carbon footprint, and gives a bit of an income to the producers who are choosing to be pickup points. They can add a little fee to any boxes that are picked up from that point, and that will give them a little bit of income. You also had a question earlier, Peter, about food poverty and about the fact that local food is expensive. We all know the reasons why local food is more expensive than supermarket food, so I won't go into that. But what we're trying to do with the Open Food Network is to minimize the overheads of local produce, so that producers don't have to stand at a market for 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday in order to sell their produce. Producers don't have to worry about the taking of orders and the boxing up of stuff and the delivery. That can be done by the Food Hub, and it can be done across a wide range of producers, with all of the produce being boxed up and bagged up and distributed together, rather than each producer having to do their own home deliveries. And what we found during the pandemic is that communities were really pulling together to address food poverty. So pre-pandemic, you had the farmers markets and the food hubs for the people who could afford to pay a premium for local produce because they believed in it, and you had the food banks for the people who were in food poverty and who couldn't afford to pay for food. I personally believe that food banks are a sticking plaster and they perpetuate food poverty. That's probably unfair and a massive generalization and not entirely true, but there is a bit of that going on, I think. What started to happen more and more during the pandemic is that communities started to look after each other, and food hubs started to realize that there were many new people slipping into food poverty who hadn't been in food poverty pre-pandemic, and that it was becoming more and more of an issue. So a lot of food hubs set up a buying it forward policy where people were buying a veg box for themselves, and they then had an option to buy a box for a neighbor they hadn't met yet. And this lovely concept of there are people out there in my community who I don't personally know who they are, but I know there are people struggling out there. And people were then putting extra money, paying a little bit extra, that the food hub could then use to subsidize food for people who couldn't afford to pay full price for it. And so it became a much more cohesive response to the community, and acknowledging that there were people in our community who need help, and they are part of our community, and we collectively will do something about it, rather than a food bank that is imposed from the outside. Any other points that anybody would like to make? I want to welcome Duncan. Thank you, Duncan, for joining. I know you've been busy with other things, and you had a session earlier on today. We've just been hearing from Rachel and Abby about their food hubs in Scotland, and I'm wondering if anybody has got any questions or comments, or if Duncan would like to. If not, let's hear from other people first. If not, then maybe Duncan could say a little bit about his book, which you talked about a lot today, but if you've got the energy and the time, I'd appreciate just a few sentences about your book. But before Duncan does that, any questions? We're a small enough group, if anybody wants to unmute their microphone and make any comments, or any. Christine.
Yeah, I'm interested in the financial viability of the hubs, because it all sounds very marginal, and I'm not, and of course we fully understand the the difficulty that vegetables are. The problem is value and not price. Really, it's how people value things, but there is an issue about what people have got in their pockets as well. So understand all that. It's just, I think one of the reasons I wanted to join this session was to kind of think through what some of the alternatives might be in terms of creating a viable, not just a short supply chain, but also a viable market. Does that make sense?
It does, and I wonder if Sorry, did you not say more, Christine?
Well, it's just like, I'm listening to presentations, which are great, and you think, oh yes, and then I'm thinking, the case studies are just putting in so much time and passion into what is, quite marginal, and that's great, but we can't do it forever, or can we? That's it.
Thank
I'm
you.
just interested in that financial part.
Yeah, and Abby, you've unmuted. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think for me, Christine, so long as it covers its costs, really is the important thing. I mean, I'm not, I coordinate the food hub, but I'm also a market gardener, and I'm not doing it to sort of to make a massive profit. That's not my motives personally. So so long as it's covering costs. Like most market gardeners, I also have other jobs, and if I wasn't going to have other jobs and going to solely live off my market gardening income, then I'd have to be charging £2.50 for a bag of salads rather than £1.20. Which is still extortionate as far as I'm concerned. But as Nick said, we probably all understand the reasons why local food is more expensive. I can tell you that most people don't understand the reasons why local food is more expensive, but I'm sure we probably do. But yeah, I think, I guess in terms of the kind of viability, economic viability, so long as it's covering its costs and its expenditure, and like a lot of social enterprises, will probably need to dip into other funding to kind of keep on top of some of that infrastructure, especially running of vehicles and renting of kind of spaces for packing and that kind of thing. Unless, as Rachel's example shows, you can kind of get that space for free. But there will always be overheads, and I've kind of run a community food shop in Glasgow as well, and it was a similar kind of thing. We had the space for free, but we had to have funding for a coordinator at the end of the day, because we were never going to be able to charge enough markup on that produce and still make it affordable. It's a very low income area of the city, so the whole point was to make it affordable and accessible to local people on low incomes. But yeah, it will always be marginal. You're right. It's not about making a massive profit. It's about sort of making sure that it's covering its costs for me. Does that answer the question? Your question?
Yes, it does. I mean, yes, I'm not talking about massive profits, but I'm talking about long-term viability. That's my interest. It's like my worry about all of the things that we do, because we do fantastic things, but my worry about all of the things that we do is that we need to also build that long-term viability. And because we're so marginal, and because it is such a tricky business selling local produce at either an affordable rate or any rate, if our competition is supermarkets, then it's like somehow collectively we have to up the game a bit. I don't know. Thanks, Abby. I get your point.
The other thing, I suppose, for me that needs to change, and I'm sure people are pretty on board with this here, is sort of farm payment systems. And obviously that's different in the UK from it is in Scotland, and I'm in Scotland, as is Rachel. But the Scottish government's just closed its consultation on their agricultural transition in Scotland. So we have an opportunity for farmers to be paid for public goods and sort of for sort of more agroecological biodiverse practices, and hopefully also to kind of reduce the also break this kind of more land equals more money and the minimum land required to be able to access farm payments. So I think we need systems change really in order to make local food more affordable, and we're not going to fix that with food hubs, because it needs to happen at a systems level, really. So it's part of kind of taking a step back and going, food hubs are part of this picture, but there's so much more to it, because what we're talking about is food systems, and for me that kind of it's going to come down to farm payments and farmers and food producers being paid properly for what they're doing, supported properly for what they're doing by those systems.
And I know that Duncan wants to come in, and I see Dusty is unmuted as well. But I just wanted to briefly mention to Christine that there are food hubs that are financially viable. It's mainly to do with scale. It's mainly a large number of producers and a large number of products and a large number of orders coming through on a weekly basis, and economies of scale. That if you're going to employ somebody who's going to be packing boxes and taking orders and doing deliveries, by increasing the number of orders, you will be making more use of that person, but the person will still get the same income, if that makes sense. I'm not suggesting we work people to the bone, but just that a small food hub would need to employ somebody for about, roughly the same number of hours as a large food hub would. But when you get the bigger orders, and particularly the higher value orders, so we were very focused with our food hub to how can we increase the basket value, because we're making a fixed percentage markup on things. So if we can start to sell higher value products like alcohol and so on, so an alcohol license allowed us to increase the basket size, then that increased the viability of the hub. Have a look at Tamar Valley food hubs. There's a on the resources page that I put up on a link earlier. Tamar Valley food hubs is a big food hub that's it's not making masses of money. It is a not-for-profit enterprise, but they are very, very viable in all sorts of ways. I think Duncan wanted to come in, and then maybe Dusty.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I was sort of keen to answer your question, Christine, and to reflect what Nick said. There are examples of food hub enterprises which are financially viable, and indeed we are one of those. So I appreciate that sort of Cambridge is perhaps a good city to be operating in from that perspective, but we've been going for sort of 20 plus years, employing sort of I think 28 people we've got at the moment, and they're paid the real living wage, and that business has been set up without any sort of external investment or funding as well. So it is possible to do. I'm also going to agree with, I'm going to sort of partially agree with what Abby said, is a question of sort of systems. But where the disagreement comes is that, to my mind, the food hubs do sit at the heart of these sort of new systems. And I mean, the two things that I kind of wanted to say to sort of nuance the answer. One is, the sustainable food industry obviously exists in juxtaposition from the globalized industrial food system. But you've got to sort of bear in mind the sort of long-term sustainability and viability of that system. So, which I think already we're starting to come to the realization that that system, I think, has had its day, and we're already seeing disrupted supply chains now. Certainly at the beginning of COVID, and now in the wake of it's now something that I think we do have to live with, that there are going to be some lines in the supermarket shelves that just aren't always available as they were before, and also we're going to see food prices rising as well. Now the thing where I think, so Abby's point about system changes, the way sort of food hubs operate, I think you are able to sort of cut a lot of costs and put a lot of efficiencies into the system, and the kind of costs that we're talking about cutting here aren't the kind of cost cutting that mainstream industry does, which would be things like sort of cutting people's wages or sort of jobs altogether. The kind of cuts that we're talking about are sort of inefficiencies of lengthy supply chains, profit margins that are added by intermediaries, wastage that is inherent in the system, and of course transportation costs. So if you can really sort of like button those things down, I think it really is possible to create viable sort of food systems that do stack up financially.
Thank you, Duncan. Dusty, I don't know, you unmuted. I don't know, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, it was just, well, Abby's sort of said to run her business how she wants and sell the food at a price that she feels affordable. She has another income. I'm a bog standard beef and sheep upland farmer, tenant, also with another income. So it just struck me sort of whichever food production system you're using, food is too cheap. And as Duncan has just alluded to, price of food will have to go up to be economic to produce without other income, whichever way you're doing it.
And I think, yeah, Rod, I'll come back to you in a minute. I think we are moving into a time of change. Well, we're not moving into, we're in a time of change, and the time when the world is evolving and we are going to need to experiment with food systems. And yes, you know, I'm hoping that what is happening in terms of the various different food hubs that are being experimented with around the UK, some will be financially viable, some won't, some will be socially and environmentally viable, and some won't. And that by being a network that will share their experiences, we can learn from that, and we can be a bit more agile about the way we design our systems for the future. Rod, did you want to come in?
Yes, I've been following the UN Food Summit earlier today. Sorry, I forgot I've not got my loudspeaker on.
Yeah, you're not very clear, Rod. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Earlier today I was on the UN Food Summit, and it's really interesting that almost a similar conversations happening there. They're all looking at very local food systems, trying to look at the real costs of food, and trying to get the sort of financial institutions to really to realize what the real costs are of food, and not, you know, I mean, at the moment the whole food system is run by investment companies, and it's based around them minimizing the costs, but it's also causing a lot of human health problems and environmental problems. So as soon as we start to bring those into the value chain, then the local food makes far more sense and is far more viable. But it's you know, it was really interesting listening to the person who's organizing the next COP in Egypt being really positive about small local scale food and how we've just got to keep on with it to show that it's viable.
Thank you. Music to my ears. It's not easy, but we're doing the right thing, and I think it's really important that we do the right thing, whether it's financially viable or not. We need to experiment and keep trying and keep evolving this thing and see what we can do with it. Thank you. We have 10 more minutes. I don't think we need to use those 10 minutes. It might be that we've come to the end of it, but I wonder if either of my colleagues, Rachel or Abby, would like to make any closing comments, or if Ellen wants to say anything to wrap up. I'd just like to say thank you, everybody, for being interested in food hubs and running food hubs, and for your inspiration. And it's what gets me out of bed in the morning, knowing that there are people out there who are building better food systems. Thank you all very much. So yeah, Rachel or Abby or Ellen, would you like to make any closing comments?
I could just add a little comment there that maybe to leave it on a very positive note, that I've found that not only are we trying to build a healthier food system, but we're also trying to build a healthy community. And just the process of the hub is doing that with a fantastic team of volunteers, but also our customers, and to have customers that want to come back and are keen to come and pick up their food because they know that it's a nice environment to come and say hi to people that have the same beliefs. That's a very positive thing.
I'd just like to echo that. Really, it's so much. It's about so much more than food in many ways. It's about those community connections and building solidarity and mutual support amongst communities, and food being at the heart of that, of course. But the co-benefits are enormous. So yeah, we shouldn't ever stop. Don't stop.
Thank you both. Absolutely, yes. I just want to pick up on a comment from Jenny, thinking of setting up a hub and producing oat milk and CSA and market gardening and veg growing. Fantastic, all power to you, good luck. I'm just about to put a link in the chat. If you do want to use the Open Food Network for your hub, then all you need will be on the link that I'm just about to put in. And Duncan has also just put a link there for his book, which is all about food hubs. Did you want to say anything about your book, Duncan, before we close?
I'm okay. Just nice to sort of have the chance to sort of plug it, and if anybody is interested in the concept of the local food ecosystem and sort of learn out a bit more about what we're doing in Cambridge with our Food Hub project, please do take a look. It's available on a pay-as-you-feel basis, so you're not going to get fleeced, and you can even download a free audio version if you want to. So it was written to get the message out there, not to make money. So
thank you, Duncan. Thank you, everybody. It's very, very good to be working with you. Best wishes to you all, and the recording, I think it's right to say, Ellen, that the recording will be available online later soon. Yes, good night all. Thanks for your time. Thanks very much, Abby and Rachel. Really appreciate you turning up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.